First, we'll take our freshly shot 375 Holland & Holland Magnum cartridges from our last pistol powder and cast bullet load, and hit her with some one shot. So, we'll put in our number 4 shell holder. Raise the ram, and put in our RCBS resizing and decapping. These aren't the carbide dies, so a little bit pop is wanted, good and tight. On these non-carbide dies, especially with the bottleneck rifle, you're going to want to have a little bit of cam over when you're setting the die, but not too much. You can easily overwork the brass and shorten its life. Set our calipers for the correct maximum length to make sure we are in spec, and I've inspected all 20 cases and they're starting to get a bit tight, but after 8 firings, once with the factory loads and with 7 times with cast rifle, between reloader 7, IMR 4198, and now with some pistol powder, we're still within spec without having to trim. So I suppose next time we won't be able to dodge it. Next, into our Rock Trucker Supreme, we're going to put our case expander. I've tried the Lee Universal Expander and was not pleased with it. So instead I bought an RCBS plug expander, and it cost a few dollars, but it was worth it. I've had it preset and it should work without much further ado. Belled. We'll grab a sample bullet. starts nicely. You don't want to overbell and absolutely wreck the hell out of the neck of the cartridge. A little belling will do just fine. Enough to start it without scraping your lead bullet. And let's not forget to wipe off the excess lube after the first step. It serves no purpose and just collects grime and trash. And some lubes will actually interfere with primer, all that. So make sure you keep your brass clean. Now that we're going to charge the cases, usually I use the balance beam when doing high accuracy rifle, the old RCBS beam that's worked for a couple decades. But for this type of work, precision is good because we're trying to establish how well these loads work. This is all experimentation and load workup. So high accuracy is good, but because of the nature of the fast burning powders, and this isn't super duper match grade stuff, instead I use the balance beam to make sure my electronic scale will work. And for a lot of this kind of plinking loads, like we're making with cast rifle and shooting light loads, especially with these fast burning powders, these the digital scales will do well enough for our purposes. So we're going to use that today. Red dot was the first powder we used in this experiment. Now we're going to use green dot, which is slightly slower burning, see if we get different results. For this, I'm going to be using a Frankfurt Arsenal plug-in electronic scale, the RCBS Trickle, and we've got our Lee Dipper to start it all off with. I'm going to dip into our little plastic container and then finish off with our trickler. Again, for these purposes, this will do just fine. In fact, if you look at the velocities on the red dot test, this method sure works pretty well, if anything. We're going for 11.5 grains. We're going to have 4 different lots. We're gonna have 4 different lots, working up gradually with gunpowder. That's the way to develop loads properly. That's what we're doing in this series of videos. I'm going to start off with the recommended lightest load according to our old-fashioned Lyman Cast 3rd edition. And although we're using a slightly different bullet, it is close to the, it's an older Lyman bullet listed, but it's close in weight and shape. This is a slow way of loading, and somewhat of this video is also instructional for new reloaders. This is also the same way you'd go about reloading high accuracy rifle for match, bottleneck, except you'd be using that instead of this, but it's the same process. You want to work slow and very carefully. Now, I could, there are many powder dispensers that will work very well with a lot of these faster burning powders. However, I tend to do this because I'm only loading 5 rounds at a time. And to change over a machine for 5 rounds actually might take longer and be less efficient time-wise. So because of this, sometimes when you're working up loads, you're best off using the dribbler, and then the lead dippers can be dangerous if you rely on them, too much and aren't very careful with them, but they can be very effective for getting the initial load started, the initial weight, to fill out most of it so that the trickle doesn't have much work to do. And this is an easy way of getting an accurate amount of powder for this type of testing and to do this work safely and efficiently. One of the things I do is many people will line up their cartridge cases in a row, empty, their empty cart cases to charge them, and they'll put the funnel and drop a charge as they go along. And this is a time-honored method, but it also has the problem that if someone forgets, they can miss charges or double charge. And if they drop a charge twice instead of moving it to the next one, there's some inherent danger to that method. Therefore, I always keep my cases, empty cases, to be charged separate from my case holder, and I simply take a fresh case and put it in upside down. This guarantees that that there cannot be a double charge, because anything that'd be in the case would empty. This helps prevent double charge, and also you can't be moving down your rows and forgetting it either. So I prefer this as a safer method. Our second roll will be 12.5 grains of green dot. Ooh, a bit excessive. Remember that your lead dipper chart, if you choose to use it, is very much suggestion. Powders will change in density from lot to lot. And volume is always something to, it's very important in our hobby, and precise measurements are always good for accuracy, consistency, and keeping your face not getting blown off. With our range of suggested powders from 11.5 grains green dot to 15.5, we will have 11.5 and 12.5, and next we're going to jump up to 14 as a medium between 12.5 and 15.5. So we'll try a bigger step up to 14 grains. Frankfurt has been a very good electronic scale. I've tried a cheaper one in the past, the one that the shotgun reloading company BPI offered. I wasn't super duper thrilled with it. And this one does well when dumping powder and rechecking with the balance beam. this one can actually be used for this type of light duty work with the trickler. Other electronic ones are either not accurate or are too touch sensitive and won't work. It's also an advantage to have a very, very, very solid workbench that keeps all of your equipment straight and also keeps your scales even and unaffected by vibration and movement. And our last lot, we're going to be going for the maximum. Now with these with the red dot, there was no pressure signs, so if that was safe, we're just going to go all the way with a max and just see how it works accuracy wise. Last time, as the load went up, the accuracy went down, so we'll see. If you're going to use the lead dippers alone, if you ever have the experience and the safety and the know-how to properly do it without having undercharges and overcharges, the suggested thing, if you have the exact measurement you want, is to take a card and scrape off the top to get a more even charge. But for what we're doing, this was just working just fine. For the last part, we're going to have bullet seating and crimping. Crimping, I would say, would be recommended, not because of the high recoil, but to make sure there's no problems with the case mouth belling and how it interacts with the chamber. I've got the Lee factory crimper, and it's permanently set to work with the old junior press we've had from forever, so we'll use that. And we'll take our seating press, but of course I load many different bullets with this cartridge, so we're going to have to adjust it. We get our handy dandy calipers out at the right total length. Put our first cartridge in. Now, one reason I like to have both these presses running for this is because I have I have 4 different sets. That's the sound. We shoot right outside the front of the house here, so that's kind of common. Because I have 4 different sets, I'd rather seat the bullet and crimp of all 5 of a single series out of our 4 series to get the kind of, so that way we don't confuse. All the cases look the same, so if we're not careful, we can mix up cases with different powder charges in them, and we want to keep them segregated for when we finally test them. Perhaps that was right at the right spot in the first place. Oh, still a bit long. Many cartridges give you some leeway when it comes to overall length, but still, consistency is consistency is consistency. And considering we're doing the same bullet with the same cartridge, just with simply different powders, we want to keep the same overall length. Tight and perfect. know how to reload in my progressive press a lot of handgun loads. And when it comes to these light rifle loads, you may see them as simple, cheap, inexpensive plinkers. And you may not want to put too much time or quality into them, which would make sense. So if you want to increase the speed at the cost of a little bit of consistency and accuracy, that makes sense. But when you're developing a new load, give it the same treatment you give it any type of super match load. That way you know why the round performed the way it did. Your test loads should always be fired from the best bench that you can manage under the best reloading conditions, so that way you can isolate scientifically what works and what doesn't. And even though we have a grease groove open, there is our finished Holland & Holland 11.5 grain green dot, 264 grain bullet sans gas check that we're going to test.